Before we dive into this heartfelt Wild West tale, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop in the comments below. Maybe you're watching from Dallas in the USA, Lahore in Pakistan, or London in the UK. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel across the world, and I truly enjoy hearing from each of you. At dawn, the horizon bled pink across the prairie, a tender light stretching itself over dust and silence. A lone rider moved slow along the empty road, his shadow long and thin against the waking earth. His coat was weather-worn, his hat dipped low as though he carried not just the dust of the trail, but years of solitude folded into his shoulders. This was Cole Hargrave, a cowboy of few words, a man whose silence clung tighter than his boots. When he reined up outside Willow Bend's boarding house, he looked less like someone arriving than like a ghost pausing in a world that had almost forgotten him. Windows cracked open, shutters clicked, and the murmurs of town gossip stirred as if the town itself breathed in his presence. On the street, a woman stood stiffly, her frame lined with fatigue, but her chin unbowed. Her name was Miriam Carter, her dress faded and hem-torn, shoes worn nearly bare. By her side, a small girl of 7 clutched a baby tight to her chest, the way a child too young is forced to learn steadiness. The girl's hair was tangled from the road, her face smudged with dust, yet her eyes carried a strange, quiet boldness. She stepped forward before her mother could, looked up at the tall stranger on horseback, and said with a voice as fragile as it was piercing, "Can you buy us, mister?" The word struck Colt like a bullet he hadn't expected, lodging deep in the chest where no armor lived. For a breath the world stopped. The horse shifted beneath him, the wind tugged at his coat. The town behind him seemed to lean in. Laughter rose low and mean from the saloon porch. A storekeeper smirked from his doorway. The phrase spread quick as fire. The beggar woman's child had asked to be bought. Miriam's face colored with shame, her eyes falling to the dirt. She said nothing, only gripped her daughter's shoulder, a silent plea to be still. Colt, unable to bear the gaze of either woman or child, muttered something flat and hollow. He had no dealings here, no business with strangers, and turned his horse away. As he walked into the saloon, he could still feel Hannah's eyes, wide and unblinking, following him like an unspoken curse. Inside, the saloon smelled of sweat and spilled whiskey. Colt nursed his drink, listening as voices sharpened around him. Men talked freely, as they always did when cruelty was safer than compassion. Miriam, they said, had been abandoned by Royce Carter, left with nothing but mouths to feed and debts chasing her shadow. Some called her desperate, others called her shameful. None spoke her name with respect. The gossip was a knife twisting under Colt's ribs, though he told himself it wasn't his fight. Still, when he stepped back out into the sunlight, the air felt thinner than before, and the girl's question echoed like a church bell inside his skull. The hours turned. The day leaned toward dusk. From the edge of the road, Colt spotted Miriam outside the boarding house, bent over a bucket too heavy for her thin wrists. Her dress clung damp with sweat, her hair fallen loose. She heaved, stumbled, and nearly fell. Colt dismounted without thinking, took the bucket from her hands, and carried it up the steps. He set it down without a word. She whispered, "Thank you," voice low, eyes fixed on the boards of the porch. For a breath, they stood there in silence, the distance between them measured not in feet, but in unspoken pain. Hannah watched from the shadows, her baby brother balanced on her hip, gaze sharp as a knife. Colt tipped his hat and walked away, but the weight of that moment followed him all the way back to his horse. The prairie gave him no peace. He rode out early next morning, hoping the distance of open land would clear his head. Yet every mile seemed to carry her face with him, the stubborn pride in her eyes, the hollow weariness carved into her posture. He remembered his own mother after his father had vanished into the war, remembered the silence of hunger, the way shame can bend a person, but not always break them. He thought of Miriam patching Hannah's shoes with scraps, rocking Eli in the window light of the boarding house. The gossip of Willow Bend clung like dust, words twisting her into something smaller than she was. He wanted to spit at them, at himself for walking away. Still, he stayed gone. For a little while. The storm came sudden, rolling dark across the sky like a warning. Rain lashed down in heavy sheets by evening, turning the street into rivers of mud. Colt, riding back into town, saw them first by the lamplight spilling from the saloon windows. Miriam stood outside the boarding house, locked out, her suitcase tossed into the street. Clothes lay scattered in the mud, soaking under the downpour. Hannah clutched Eli close beneath her mother's shawl, shivering so hard her teeth chattered. Miriam stood tall, though, shoulders squared, shielding her children with her body, her chin raised as if daring the world to laugh at her misery. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She only endured, and, in that endurance, something broke inside Colt. He swung down from his horse, rain dripping from his hat brim. The crowd gathered under the saloon awning smirked, whispering, watching like buzzards. Colt said nothing to them. He bent, lifted the soaked suitcase from the mud, and slung it across his saddle. Then he turned to Miriam, his face unreadable, and said in a voice low as thunder, "Come on." Miriam hesitated, dignity fighting with desperation, pride like a flame that refused to die, even in the storm. Her lips parted as if to protest. But Hannah tugged at her dress, whispering, "Mama, please." The plea was enough. Miriam's eyes closed for a heartbeat, then opened wide and clear. She nodded once, took her daughter's hand, and followed. Colt led them into the rain, away from the gossiping eyes, away from the town that had broken them. There for silhouettes blurred by the storm, swallowed by the prairie night, as though the land itself was taking them into its secret keeping. The prairie swallowed them whole, the storm guiding them north toward the tree line where Colt's cabin lay. By the time they reached it, night had settled, thick and black, the only light a dim glow seeping through the cracks of the old log walls. Colt pushed open the crooked door, the scent of pine and smoke greeting them. Inside was simple, a rough-hewn table, tools on the wall, firewood stacked high, a stone hearth with embers still alive. Miriam's gaze lingered on the pelts draped across the floor, the rifle hanging above the door, the silence of a man who had built his life without company. The children, though, felt only the warmth. Hannah's eyes widened at the steady fire. Eli cooed at the glow. Colt laid blankets near the hearth and stepped aside, awkward in his own home, as though the place suddenly felt smaller. Miriam whispered, "Thank you," softer than before, almost swallowed by the crackle of the flames. The first nights carried the weight of strangeness. Colt ate at the table alone, while Miriam and the children huddled near the hearth. Eli cried often, his small body restless in the night, and Colt would lie awake on his cot, listening to the woman's lullabies. Her voice was quiet, worn thin, but it had a beauty like water finding stone, gentle and patient, steady even through exhaustion. Slowly, small gestures began to weave themselves into their days. Miriam mended the tear in his coat with neat stitches. Colt chopped firewood at dawn, so she wouldn't have to strain. He brought back rabbits from the line and left them cleaned on the porch before she woke. The words between them were few, but in the pauses and silences something tender began to settle, like snow melting into soil. Hannah, though, held back longest, her watchful eyes measuring the man who had taken them in, testing him with silence. In town, tongues wagged. Men in the saloon laughed over whiskey, saying Colt had trapped himself with a woman no one else wanted, with children that weren't his. Some pitied him, others mocked him outright. When word reached Miriam, through a snide remark from a woman at the trading post, the shame cut deeper than any hunger had. That night by the fire, she told Colt they should leave, that she wouldn't drag him down with her. Colt sat across from her, shadows heavy on his face, anger simmering in his chest. Not at her, but the cruelty that hunted her wherever she went. His voice was steady when he said, "You and the children stay. Let the world talk." The words loosened something inside Miriam. For the first time in months, the dam of her composure broke, and tears slipped down her face, not noisy but quiet, raw as the rain against a cabin roof. Colt didn't reach for her, didn't touch her. He simply sat near the fire, letting her weep until the storm inside her softened. Hannah, seeing her mother's tears, crossed the room and slipped her small hand into Colt's. It was a gesture simple as breath, yet it bound them in a way words never could. Miriam lifted her gaze then, and for the first time saw not just a lonely cowboy, but a shelter. Peace is fragile on the frontier, and it doesn't last long. One night, when a moon rode high and the pines whispered in the wind, the sound of hooves broke the quiet. Colt stepped onto the porch, lantern in hand, and saw 3 riders emerge from the dark. At their head was Royce Carter, Miriam's estranged husband, drunk, bitter, eyes full of hunger for what he'd lost and what he still thought he owned. He spat venom, calling Miriam by name, demanding his wife and children back. His voice slurred with malice. He claimed he'd sell the little ones to clear his debts, laughing at his own cruelty. Colt's body tightened, one hand hovering near his holster, the other steady on the lantern. His voice was calm, though low as the growl of thunder. "Best you turn back." Miriam appeared beside him, trembling but resolute. For months she had swallowed shame, lowered her head, endured. Not now. Standing shoulder to shoulder with Colt, she raised her chin and said clearly into the night, "I am not yours. Not anymore. Not ever again." The words cut through Royce like glass. His face twisted, rage breaking free. He lunged from his horse, and in the mud and lantern light, violence erupted. Colt fought not like a brawler, but like a man who had finally found something worth defending. The struggle was harsh, fists and boots colliding, mud flying beneath the storming hooves. Royce's men joined, but Colt's fury burned hotter. When Royce at last stumbled back, bloodied and beaten, his pride more shattered than his body, he mounted his horse and fled into the night, his curses fading into the trees. The cabin was quiet after, save for the crackling fire inside. Colt, bruised and breathing hard, sat by the table while Miriam cleaned his wounds. Her hands, which had known only labor and survival, now moved with tenderness. The children hovered close, no longer afraid, as though they had finally learned what safety meant. Colt watched Miriam by the firelight, her hair falling loose around her face, her eyes meeting his with a softness born of gratitude and something deeper still. She spoke gently, voice trembling but clear. "You didn't buy us, mister. You saved us." Colt said nothing, only nodded, because the truth swelled too big in his chest for words. Morning broke golden over the prairie, the storm long gone, the air fresh and alive. The cabin no longer felt empty. It breathed with life. Children's laughter, a woman's quiet strength, the silent companionship of a man who had been alone too long. Together they stepped into the new day, not as strangers, not as burdens, but as something closer to family. And if you listen close, as the old soul telling this tale, you'll hear the lesson plain. Life on the frontier can strip a person bare, leave them marked by gossip and cruelty, but small mercies can stitch the torn cloth back together. A lifted bucket, a shared roof, a steady hand in the dark. These are the gestures that turn strangers into kin. The world may brand you with its cruel tongues, but love, the quiet kind, rewrites the story. Remember this, dear listener. What you take in with kindness may one day become the very thing that saves you.